Let's review this problem from a more contemporary perspective. Imagine reconstructing the history of the American Revolution today, based entirely upon oral traditions, handed down over 9 generations, without books, letters, paintings, or pictures. It would be impossible to recreate the words of Cornwallis and Washington, or to resurrect the drama as it was actually played out. Now, imagine writing this history in London, thousands of miles away from where the events unfolded, in the home of those who were defeated. Such is the history of Islam. The first and best Hadith, Takrith and Sirah, were compiled in Baghdad, not in Mecca or Medina, 2 to 3 centuries removed. And like detailing the American Revolution in Britain, each of the Persian scholars wrote in a highly politicized environment for men with a personal agenda. A compelling argument can be made for Islam being Persian rather than Arabian, the birthplace being Baghdad, not Mecca. Yet while none of this attests to the reliability or unbiased nature of the Islamic scripture, it doesn't actually matter. If Muhammad were actually a prophet, if Allah were really a god, and if the Hadith and Qur'an were really divinely inspired and dictated, the accuracy of these books would be of paramount importance. Our eternity would be based upon their every word, but since Muhammad was as feeble-minded as his deity, and as emotionally disturbed as his scripture depicts him, an accurate witness and a faithfully maintained account is irrelevant. So, if much of this isn't true, why bother? Because through force, fate, and faith, over 1 billion people believe it's true. They believe Muhammad was a prophet, Allah was his God, and that the Qur'an was comprised of divine revelations. They even think the sayings of the prophet upon which the Hadith, Sirah, and Sunnah are based were divinely inspired scripture. And because most Muslims aren't free, literally trapped by fate and force in this delusion and in the hellish condition the doctrine inspires, compassion compels us to expose the fraud and to release them from the shackles of Islam. Oh, then there's the other problem, Islamic terrorism. This stuff is corrosive, causing people to act in accordance with its teachings, its prophet, and its God. Islam commands and conditions men to murder. It motivates them to commit acts of terror. If we want to thwart this foe, we must first come to understand what its adherents believe and what drives them to such ungodly behavior. If we want to rid the world of terror, we must first expose the doctrine that makes men terrorists. Remember, prior to Muhammad, Arabs conquered no one. After Islam, they subjected much of the known world to their sword. What changed them, pray tell, if not these words? While these Islamic holy books aren't historically reliable, they are Islam, not a version, interpretation, or corruption of Islam, but the essence of the religion. Muhammad can be no different than these books depict him. If they don't accurately predict the prophet and his dark spirit, they are unknowable and thus irrelevant. Frankly speaking, Islam loses either way. Returning to the Hadith, we discover an interesting artifact concerning the early Meccans and their Kaaba. It also heralds from the year of the elephant. Abdul Muttalib was a big shot in town, a wealthy idolater born 2 generations before Muhammad. In the line of Qusay, he became the custodian of the Kaaba.
Tabari. After the death of his uncle al-Muttalib, Abdul Muttalib took over the privilege of watering and feeding the pilgrims, which the sons of Abd Manaf had held before him. He was honored and was a man of great importance, for not one was his equal. Ishaq. Sleeping on the graves of Hagar and Ishmael, he was ordered in a vision to dig Zamzam. Allahu Akbar, he shouted, "This is the well of our father Ishmael." Tabari. He brought out what was buried there, namely 2 golden gazelles, swords, and coats of mail. He made the swords into a door for the Kaaba.
It's interesting that the Kaaba's treasure contained the implements Muhammad would use to loot the world, swords and coats of mail. The door to the Kaaba's house and the path to Islam were the same. Ownership of the newfound booty was determined by a gambling game. Divining arrows were thrown at Hubble's feet.
the greatest of the idols. Ishaq. Muttalib prayed to Allah, and the priest threw the arrows. The Kaaba won the gazelles.
Abdul Muttalib
Was the first to institute the 2 yearly caravans.
He was
The first to obtain for the Quraysh guarantees of safety, which allowed them to travel far and wide from the sacred precincts of Mecca.
guarantees Muhammad would break. Then one day, sun boring down on the treeless town, Muttalib was struggling to clear the well of Zamzam when
Ishaq and Tabari. It is alleged, and Allah only knows the truth, that Abdul Muttalib encountered opposition when he was digging Zamzam. He vowed that if given 10 sons to make his labor less arduous and protect him, he would sacrifice one of them to Allah at the Kaaba.
Bad move, because eventually he had 10 sons, so foolishly faithful to the rocks, he tossed divining arrows at Hubble's feet to determine which of his sons should die.
Ishaq. They used to conduct their affairs according to the decision of the arrows.
His youngest lost. The boy's name was Abd Allah, or slave to Allah. Now why would someone name a kid slave to Allah, a generation before Islam's prophet claimed that Allah was the creator God of the universe? The answer is as embarrassing as any in the annals of religious lore. For all Muhammad really did was promote one of the existing Meccan idols, the moon god Allah, above Hubble, Allat, Manat, Al-Uzza, and hundreds of others. On this day, Allah had to compete for adoration, as Muttalib's tossing of arrows at Hubble's feet attests. A Bukhari Hadith confirms the godly congestion.
When the Prophet entered Mecca on the day of the conquest, there were 360 idols around the Kaaba. The Prophet started striking them with a stick.
Islamic scholar Montgomery Watt, one of the English translators of Tabari, adds an interesting footnote. He says, the name, not word, Allah, has throughout been, and that would be wrongly, translated as God. It should be kept in mind, however, that in the pre-Islamic period it does not necessarily mean God in a monotheistic sense. It was known from the Qur'an, Surah 29:61 and 39:38, that many pre-Islamic Arabs believed in Allah as a God who was superior to other gods whom they also recognized. Allah was a name, much like the Judeo-Christian Yahweh. Muslims desperately needed the world to see it otherwise. For if Allah was a proper name, not a word, their religion was a fraud. The creator of the universe can't be a pagan god, no matter how big a stick Muhammad swung. And Allah can't be Yahweh any more than I can be George Washington. Arabic, like Hebrew before it, is a Semitic language. In Hebrew, El was the word for God, lowercase g, as in idols. Elohim was used with the article to convey God with a capital G. In Arabic, El became Il. Then, over time, Arabs derived a secondary word for God, Ilah, with Al being the Arabic word for the. Muslims would have us believe that Allah is a contraction of Al and Ilah. But the first pillar of Islam contradicts this claim when it says, there is no Ilah but Allah. If Allah were the Arabic word for God, it would have been written, there is no Allah but Allah. Moreover, the Qur'an itself uses Ilah, when Allah claims to be the God of Abraham, Qur'an 2:132. And that ends the debate, because the only way Muslims can claim Allah, not Ilah, is the Arabic word for God, is for the Qur'an to be errant, or for its author to be either ignorant or deceitful. Further, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Islamic traditions, like the one we just reviewed, that confirm that Allah was the name of a well-known pagan deity, at least in Mecca. Their own scriptures profess that Allah had an ignominious rule as a Meccan rock idol centuries before he was transformed from God to God, from Ilah to Allah. All of this serves to destroy the most essential Islamic myth. We all worship the same God.